Colombian Gold wasn't just weed. It was the first strain that made American smokers believe marijuana could be something special. Because these days, when somebody says they've got some gas or some exotic, it doesn't really mean much, because every shop is packed with 100 different strains that are insanely potent. But back in the 1970s, Colombian Gold was the standard for exotic weed. And get this, it wasn't even green. It was gold. It came up from the mountains of Colombia, and for one whole generation of smokers, it was the standard that everything else got measured against. This is the story of Colombian Gold. So the first thing you've got to understand is that nobody sat down in a lab and made Colombian Gold. It's a landrace, which means nature made it over a very long time. Just wild cannabis growing in one specific place for generation after generation, slowly adapting to the exact conditions there until it became something you couldn't find anywhere else. And the place this strain came from is genuinely incredible. It's a mountain range on Colombia's Caribbean coast called the Sierra Nevada de Santa Marta. And this isn't some little hill. It's the highest coastal mountain range on the entire planet, with peaks pushing almost 18,000 feet, sitting just 26 miles from the beach. So you've got this wild mix of blazing tropical sun, cool mountain nights, and steady ocean wind, all in one spot. And that unique environment is exactly what shaped this plant into what it became. Farmers up in those mountains grew it for generations, saving their best seeds year after year, until they had this legendary strain perfected. And those farmers weren't working fresh ground either, because the Sierra Nevada had been home to indigenous peoples like the Kogi and Arhuaco for thousands of years, which means cannabis cultivation in that region has deep roots that go way back before any of the modern trade ever happened. Now, because this plant grew all across those mountains, different areas ended up producing slightly different versions of it. And the most famous version of all came from right around the city of Santa Marta, sitting at the base of those mountains. So people started calling that specific variation Santa Marta Gold. And that city became the heart of the entire trade, because it was the closest port to all those mountain farms. So that's where the weed flowed through on its way out of the country. Now, I've got to be honest with you about the genetics, because there's more to this than most people think. A lot of folks call Colombian Gold a pure wild land race, and for the most part, that's true. But some historians who've studied it say that famous Santa Marta Gold was actually something Colombian growers refined on purpose over the years, mixing their local plants with other seeds until they had it perfected. So this wasn't just random wild weed growing on a hillside. Those farmers knew exactly what they were doing, and they built something special. And what they built is exactly where the gold in the name comes from, because this weed genuinely came out golden. When the plant was left to grow all the way out and then dried slowly under that intense sun, the buds turned this beautiful golden, yellow-blonde color instead of green. Now people love to tell this story that growers made it gold by cutting into the stem to choke the plant off. But most Colombian sources say that's basically a myth. The real reason is a lot simpler. As the plant fully ripens, the green chlorophyll inside it starts to break down. And once that green fades away, it reveals the gold and yellow colors that were hiding underneath the whole time. Add in that long, slow curing under the sun, and you get that famous golden look. So the color wasn't some trick. It was proof the weed was grown all the way out and finished right. So let's talk about what it was actually like, because it earned its reputation. Colombian Gold was a pure cannabis sativa, and the buds were light, airy, and fluffy, absolutely covered in crystals. The smell was this amazing mix of sweet and skunky, with a really distinct lime and citrus kick driven by high limonene content, and some earthy, spicy notes underneath that point to a strong myrcene presence too. But the real magic was the high, because it was the definition of an up high. It was energetic, clear, creative, and uplifting, the kind of high that woke you up and got you going instead of gluing you to the couch. People said it blew the cobwebs right out of your head. Now I do have to be real with you about the strength, because this always gets exaggerated. You'll see modern versions listed at like 20% THC, but that's the modern recreations, not the original. Back in the 70s, nobody was doing lab tests, and the honest truth is, the average weed of that era was way weaker than what we have today, a lot of it testing down around 1 or 2%. Premium stuff like Colombian Gold was stronger than that, but it wasn't hitting modern numbers. A big part of why it felt so powerful was those loud, lively terpenes, and the fact that it was being compared to the absolute garbage most people were smoking at the time. And that's the key to understanding why it blew up, because you've got to know what most American weed was like back then. It was rough. The majority of it was cheap, low-grade brick weed literally compressed into hard, flat blocks, packed with seeds and stems, making it harsh to smoke. But that was the standard back then. So when premium imports started showing up, they became the first real brand names weed ever had. Right alongside Acapulco Gold from Mexico and Panama Red from Panama, just having any of those back then meant you had the best. But here's what really sets this strain apart, because behind it was one of the wildest smuggling stories of the entire 20th century. In Colombia, they called it the Bonanza Marimbera, which basically means the marijuana boom. And it completely took over that Santa Marta region and the La Guajira Peninsula region. So here's how it happened. Colombia used to have a big cotton farming industry in that area, but when that industry collapsed, all these poor farmers suddenly needed a new way to survive. And right at that exact moment, America's hippie generation just happened to be desperate for good weed. So being that those farmers needed more money, they switched their cotton fields over to marijuana, and it exploded. By the mid-70s, one estimate said around 80% of the farmers in that region had switched over to growing weed. And the scale of it was almost unbelievable. Farmers were hauling huge bales of weed down those mountains on entire trains of mules. Others were floating pressed blocks down the rivers in canoes. And retired American pilots, including guys who flew in Vietnam, were loading up old cargo planes and taking off from hidden dirt airstrips out in the desert. It got so massive that by the end of the 70s, Colombia was supplying around 70% of all the marijuana coming into the United States. A Time magazine report from back then said around 70,000 families were involved in it, and that the whole thing was pulling in more money than coffee, which was Colombia's biggest legal export at the time. So this one plant had quietly become the biggest business in the entire country. Now I got a quick myth here I have to clear up real quick, because you'll hear people say American Peace Corps volunteers were the ones who started the whole Colombian weed trade back in the 60s. And honestly, that story is pretty much debunked. The people who were actually there and the historians who studied it say it wasn't the Peace Corps at all. It was Colombian farmers and local smugglers who built this thing themselves. So don't believe that Peace Corps version. It's mostly a myth. But what's absolutely true is how big this weed got over here, because Colombian Gold didn't just take over the streets, it took over the culture too. It became a symbol of that whole 70s era. It got name-dropped in music, like in Ringo Starr's hit No No song, which opens with a lady from Colombia offering the best weed in the land. And that song went all the way to number 3 on the charts in 1975. Steely Dan mentioned the fine Colombian in one of their songs too. Colombian Gold wasn't just weed at that point. It was woven right into the music, the parties, and the whole rebellious spirit of the decade. So how does the king of 70s weed just disappear? Well, just like the other legendary imports, it got hit from every direction at once. The first blow was that American growers finally figured out how to grow potent, seedless weed at home. Sinsemilla, they called it, and it started beating the imports on quality. On top of that, hippies were bringing back seeds from Afghanistan, and those Afghan indica plants often traced back to Hindu Kush genetics, which were short, fast, and easy to hide. Way more practical to grow than a giant, slow tropical plant like Colombian Gold. So growers started crossing everything with that Afghan indica, and the pure sativas slowly got pushed out. Then on top of that, the government stepped in hard. The US backed a program that sprayed weed fields with a toxic poison called paraquat, which set off a huge health scare about contaminated weed. And in 1978, a joint US and Colombian military operation called Operation Fulminante, launched by Colombian President Julio Cesar Turbay with some 10,000 soldiers, moved in and militarized that whole region, cracking down on everyone in the trade and ending that relatively peaceful smuggling era for good. But here's the thing that really killed Colombian Gold. The smugglers moved on to something else, a harder drug that was smaller, easier to hide, and made way more money than weed ever could. So those same smuggling routes and networks that were built on Colombian Gold got taken over by that other substance, and that's what gave rise to the infamous Colombian cartels. The farmers shifted from weed to that, which led to the violence exploding, and just like that, the golden era of Colombian weed was over. And by the early 80s, the real Colombian Gold had basically vanished from America. But even though the strain itself mostly disappeared, its bloodline became one of the most important in all of weed. Because Colombian Gold was one of the key parents used to create Skunk Number One, along with Acapulco Gold and Afghan Indica, in a breeding project spearheaded by a California cultivator known as Sam the Skunkman, working out of the Sacred Seed Company in the late 70s. And Skunk Number One is arguably the most influential strain in modern history, one of the first stable hybrids ever made, and a genetic building block behind a massive chunk of the weed on shelves today. Colombian Gold gave skunk that clear, energetic sativa kick, while the Afghan Indica brought in that potency and shorter structure. On top of that, its genetics also fed into the legendary Haze family, which led to famous strains like Super Silver Haze and Jack Herer. So even now, Colombian Gold's DNA is quietly running through a huge portion of modern weed, whether people realize it or not. And you can still find weed sold as Colombian Gold today, but you've got to be honest about it. Most of it is modern recreations or preservation projects are not the exact original strain from the 70s. But with that being said, there are a few dedicated seed banks and Colombian families out there keeping the real genetics alive. And now that Colombia has legalized medical cannabis, that Santa Marta region is once again home to some prized native weed. So, the bloodline survived, even if the original golden version is mostly a memory. So, at the end of the day, Colombian Gold is one of the most legendary names weed has ever produced. It was a wild golden plant from the highest coastal mountains on Earth that fueled a smuggling boom so massive it out-earned coffee, defined the way an entire generation got high, and then got wiped out by poison, politics, and the rise of cocaine. It set the standard for what premium weed even meant, and its genetics went on to help build a huge part of the modern weed world.